Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this November 16th meeting of the Rotary Club of Des Moines. I'm President Becky Greenwald. You know, for our little Rotary factoid today, I was thinking about our guest speaker in NFL football. I thought, well, what connections are there in the world of football? And so I found out that there's a long-standing Rotary tie with the annual Tournament of Roses parade in Pasadena every New Year's morning. How many of you knew that? Did you know we had a float? Oh, very good. So I watched that, but I must be multitasking and not doing a very good job because I didn't realize it. So I'm going to pay attention this New Year's and watch for the Rotary parade float. But the parade theme for the Rotary Roses entry is clean water, the essence of life, actually the music of life, and the parade, the overall parade theme is celebrating a world of music, the universal language. We got a little heads up for January 1st. And one thing that I wanted to share was there was a Rotary float committee that was formed back just before 1980, and they decided they wanted to really help be sure that we promote Rotary through the tens of millions that watch the Rose Parade each year. So that float committee did send us a letter, and they make it very easy for us to find out about the float. They make it very easy for anybody that wants to donate towards the cost of putting the float together. They've got a great website at rotaryfloat.org. And not only do they make it easy to help financially, but they also recognize donors on their website. And you can sign in too if you don't donate and look at photos of how the float construction progress is going. You can sign up to get float updates. You can learn about how to be a float rider, or they call the people walking along outwalkers. So you can also find out who can be outwalkers and how they're deciding who that's going to be. And little tidbit, this year, our 2023-24 Rotary International President, Gordon McNally, is looking forward to riding on the float. So he will be in Pasadena on New Year's Day. You can read about the history of the Rotary Rose Parade participation. They've got photos of every single float since 1923 when they had their first entry. There were only 5 entries between 1923 and 1966. But then this Rotary Float Committee got busy and established, and every year since 1980, there's been a Rotary Float. So that's 44 years and counting. And again, last year, now you guys that watched, did you realize that the Rotary Float did get an honor? Yes? Yeah, it did. It was named the winner of the Princess Trophy. And the category was Most Outstanding Floral Presentation among entries 35 feet and under. And there's even a video of the float and the announcer talking about that last year. So it's kind of fun to hear what the announcers had to say about it. So I don't know about you, but when I tune in this morning, this New Year's, like I usually do, I'm going to pay more attention so I can see that float and find out what they have to say about us.
Becky, another Rotary factoid is that it was founded in Evanston, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. Therefore, the Bears.
Oh, you've been saving that up for today,
Yes,
haven't you? Okay, very appropriate, very appropriate. Okay, so Randy Worth, I'm going to ask you to quit drinking that iced tea and come to the podium because we'd like you to let you know that Randy also leads our Wheels Fellowship, where members can join interesting things about wheels. But now he's going to share a moment of inspiration, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance and the 5-way test. Randy.
Well, that is certainly the hope. President Becky's going to help me with this. I'm trying to draw her out of her fear of public speaking. So with focus on history today, I hope to offer some inspiration on just the power of respect, and with a brief history of the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. Charles Goodyear was born on December 29th, 1800 in Connecticut, and at age 12 he left school and went to work in his father's hardware store, which he liked, and he got pretty good at it. He enjoyed being a merchant. So when he married in 1823, he and his wife moved to Philadelphia, and he opened up his own hardware store. And he loved chemistry and innovation. And so with his hardware store, he discovered things A lot of small agricultural pieces of equipment were sold in hardware stores. And he did some of his own designs. He had some small patents. Import had them made overseas and brought here, and did very well with his store, and actually became very well off. But his driving passion was chemistry. And he became fascinated with rubber. And at that time, it's crude rubber, also called India rubber, and he thought in his mind all the different things that perhaps rubber could be made for. So he sets out to a bunch of experiments. And he financed those experiments on the back of his hardware business. By 1830, he was very ill from chemical exposure. He was broke. His business was bankrupt, and just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, he was thrown into debtor's prison. To that point, his experiments had let him understand that the way he was doing it, rubber melted, and it became sticky, so it's not necessarily useful. But he kept working, and by 1939, he discovered the right combination of chemicals and heat that made rubber pliable, could form it, and waterproof, which he called that process then vulcanization, which he was awarded a patent for in two patents, 1839 and then another one in 1844. Unfortunately, he didn't gain any, didn't get to enjoy any financial success from that, because the patents that he made before, when he had his hardware business, and he sold some of those, he had to use up all his money fighting in court, because the ones he sold them to claimed them as their own instead of giving him credit for them. So he's still broke, right? Sorry, I'm trying to do this from memory, it's not workable. So things go on, and July 1st of 1860, he's in New York and extremely suffering from chemical exposure. He collapses at a hotel he was at and dies right there. Becky, you're on, kid.
So, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company was founded in 1898.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, so he dies in 1860. The Goodyear the Tire and Rubber Company was formed in 1898. And I'll add, without any connection to the Goodyear family. So how is that? Well, enter Frank A. Seiberling. And if you look him up, it's going to look like Seiberling, but it's actually pronounced Seiberling. And I know that because this is my wife's family heritage, to which my father-in-law says, don't get nervous about this. He said my limb was cut off in favor of the rest of the tree. So he was involved with the vulcanization process, and to make this just a little shorter, in 1839 he buys an abandoned factory in Akron, Ohio, starts a tire company, and names it Goodyear Tire and Rubber in honor of Charles Goodyear. Briefly, one partial quote that Goodyear made just before his passing. He says, "The advantages of a career in life should not be estimated exclusively by the standard of dollars and cents, as is too often done. Man has just cause for regret when he sows and no one reaps." Wouldn't he be interested in how he sowed and somebody else reaped in his name? Well, stand with me and we'll pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the five-way test. Is it true? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And is it fun? Meet and greet. Brief one.
Good job. That's
I'm well.
Share that with me, John, dear. I always wondered this.
Nicely done, Randy. I checked that.
Well, lots of meeting and greeting going on this morning, this afternoon, I should say. Okay, we've got several guests that we'd like to introduce if we can get underway here. Must be some mesmerizing conversation going on back that way. This is great. Good to see each other, isn't it? Yay. Good. Okay, several guests. We'd like to ask our guests to please stand when I call their name, and then we'll applaud for all of you at the end. So, Magda Apeng has been visiting a Rotarian from Ghana. She's been with us for the third time, and she's getting ready to head back home next week, but she'll be back after the first of the year. So thank you so much for joining us. Please stay standing. Sarah Hayes, Senior Vice President of Iowa Hospital Association Information Center, guest of Abhay Napuram. Steve Musser with Legacy Bridge and a guest of Mike Heiser. Welcome. Chris Smith, guest and father of Carter Smith. Nick Varco, principal, and a guest of Scott Bennett. And Carol Ziemba, the spouse of our speaker. Welcome, and let's give a big round of applause to all of them. So, it is tumbler time. Consider donating $5 into the little cup there on the table if you don't have a green dollar sign on your badge. But if you do, you can still put some money in there. We can always use more money in our Rotary Club at Des Moines Foundation. And as always, we thank you so much for your continued support. And so now, where in the world is Club 27? Well, check this out. Jackie Norris told us that she and Matt were going home after our October 26th meeting, and they made a lemonade out of a situation. They were in a 5-car accident. Yeah, now, luckily, nobody was injured, everybody was okay, but they were hung up there at the side of the road for a while. So look at them being Rotarians and making their own little sign while they were waiting for the accident to clear. So that's pretty good. We're glad nobody in the car was hurt. And then also we had our second chance Tuesday again at the Big Grove Brewery. And if you would have asked me back in July if we'd been meeting outside in November, I'd say, are you kidding? But we had a great time out in front of the little fireplace, having a brewski and a little bit of food. So we snapped this photo just before Joyce Wheeler came to join us. So we had a nice little group, and we'll be back the second Tuesday of December. Most likely it's going to be a busy, busy day, but we'll check in on everybody with that one. And so not only that, if you want to check out one of these signs when you're going somewhere or just doing something fun around town, see Kitty and bring it back a photo so that we can go with you. And now I'd like to ask Ann Schmerle to come forward with an announcement. She said I could always call her the zoo lady if you'd like. So. Thank
you. Okay, good afternoon. I have a couple of factoids for us today as well. So did you know an estimated 38% of Americans are eligible to give blood or platelets, but of those, less than 10% actually donate each year? Each pint of blood that is collected can help save up to 3 lives. And did you know that blood donation is an initiative of our Rotary District Governor, Dennis Drager, and he is encouraging all club members across the district to donate and track throughout the Rotary year, July 1st through June 30th of 2024. So, Becky said I need to say this. We've asked you for your time, we've asked you for your money, and now we're asking you for your blood. So, the Rotary is partnering with the Red Cross, and we're hosting a blood drive on December 12th. It'll be located at the Blank Park Zoo Discovery Center meeting rooms, so you can watch the birds in the rainforest area while you're giving your blood. There are posters on the table with information and a link to sign up for your spot. So the drive will be from 1 to 6 p.m. On that day. There's several different ways that you can help. So first, if you're already a regular donor at another organization like LifeServe or Red Cross or anywhere else, you can make sure you're tracking that and give that information to Kitty so she can track that for our club statistics. Two, you'll be getting information sent out by email as well as in the newsletter, so make sure you pass this on to all of your friends, family, colleagues. Our goal is to have 65 donors for the event. So make sure you pass that information on. There's links there that people can get signed up for your spot. If you are unable to donate, we do have a couple of volunteer positions to help check in and do whatever the Red Cross staff need us to do. So come see me if you would rather volunteer for that day. But most importantly, you need to roll up your sleeve and meet us there on December 12th. So sign up for your time slot on the link, and we will see you then.
Thank you very, very much. Okay, so next up we have a page or two to turn. Our past president and current communication committee chair, Sean Mullen, will now introduce our speaker. So Sean.
Thank you, President Becky. Fellow Rotarians and friends, my gosh, you are in for a treat today. I first met our guest speaker when we were both assigned identities to the Fire Protection Service of the Witness Protection Program. He in the south of Chicago sector because of his innate technical abilities, and I to the flatland backwaters of central Iowa because it had been determined through testing that I'd been educated beyond my intelligence. As it happened, he rose very quickly through the ranks with a couple of prestigious fire protection manufacturing companies, while I toiled and continue to do so in the low margin, high frustration world of independent fire systems distribution. Our paths would cross frequently at industry gatherings and survivor networking events. When he finally aged out of the protection program as the marketing guru for fire protection products at 3M, he was free to pursue his passion of National Football League history and has become an award-winning author who has published When Football Was Football, The Chicago Cardinals and the Birth of the NFL, Cadets, Cannons, and Legends, The Football History of Morgan Park Military Academy, and Bears versus Cardinals, the NFL's oldest rivalry. Our guest first became interested in the history of football after discovering that his father was a draft choice for the Chicago Cardinals of the National Football League in the 1940s. He, not his father, is now recognized nationally for his knowledge of the early days of the game and has become a resource for articles, photos, and reports in Sports Illustrated, the New York Times, the Chicago Sun-Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Arizona Republic, ESPN, the Daily Southtown, NBC Sunday Night Football, CBS Football. Good God, man, what are you compensating for? We get it. You're good. He's also appeared on WGN's documentary Football in Chicago, a Comcast sports special on the Chicago Bears, as well as on radio stations such as WBBM and WSCR in Chicago. He also hosts the podcast When Football Was Football on the Sports History Network, which explores forgotten topics in the long history of football in the Chicago area. Our guest lives with his gracious and lovely wife, Carol, whom you was introduced to earlier, in Frankfort, Illinois. So lest you've never seen anyone from there, friends, this is what they look like. And they also live with a wonderful, ill-tempered, but charitable Shih Tzu doggie named Lucy. And they enjoy touring the country and making new friends, like I know that they will today. Friends, please join me with a warm Rotary Club of Des Moines welcome to my friend and soon to be yours, Joe Ziemba.
Thank you, Sean. I was really impressed by that. Is that introduction going to come out in paperback soon? I don't know whether to thank you or to borrow a shovel to dig out from all that. Thank you very much. So we are going to talk about football, old football, going way back 120 years ago. And so bear with me. We hope to have some fun. You don't have to understand football to maybe appreciate some old history. And so bear with me as we go through. I'll see if this works. There we go. I want to thank everyone here at the Rotary Club, Becky and Kitty and Sean, everyone I've met. What an impressive location and club. So thank you so much for having me and for taking this big risk. So I want to introduce you to a couple of guys behind me. I hope everybody can see over there. And I'll bend down. I ate too much as a kid, started growing up, so I'm blocking the screen. But gentleman on the left is Dutch Sterneman. And Dutch was the co-owner of the Chicago Bears back in the 1920s with George Halas. And recently his family found out he kept all his records. So 90 years later, they donated all of his material to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And the reason that's important is that before that, researchers like myself who have no life, except looking for stuff like this, were able to find out how much players got paid or how much it cost to rent a stadium. And so we're going to share some of that with you today in our little presentation. But thank you, Dutch Sterneman. And the guy on the right might look like me, except he's better looking as my dad, Joe Ziemba. And as Sean mentioned, I got a lot of my inspiration from him. He was a draft choice of the NFL. And he got a contract he signed with the Cardinals, now the Arizona Cardinals, back in the 40s. Anyone want to guess what a rookie got paid in the 1940s? They got paid by the game. It was $110 a game. So compared to the $60 million contracts now, things have changed. But in addition to that whopping $110 a game, he had to provide his own shoes and shoulder pads. That was the NFL back in the 1940s. But he didn't talk much about his career. I found a lot of the information that inspired me to start pursuing my own history and research on football, especially the Cardinals, as we move forward. So, my only commercial, the most recent book, which Sean mentioned, is Bears versus Cardinals, the NFL's oldest rivalry, which contains a lot of the information from Dutch Sterneman. I have some flyers in front, and now I'll go away from that subject and tell you some good stories, I hope. So, no Taylor Swift stories today. It's amazing. I did get asked at a presentation last week about Taylor Swift and her impact on the social hierarchy of the NFL, and I couldn't answer it. I don't know. No more Taylor for today, anyway. And we won't cover helmet testing in 1912. Sean Mullen played at Hastings College, and that is not his picture, although that's his graduating class from 1912. I'm not saying he's old, but his driver's license is for covered wagons only. And football is a little bit different. If you couldn't tackle a guy, just punch him out. That's what they did way back when. And of course, the fans were a bit different too. I'll give you a chance to look at this one. It looks a little strange. This is from the University of Chicago, which was a powerhouse in 1905. and that's a football game. And everyone came all dressed up. They came in horse and carriages, and the ladies were all in their finery. But the thing that attracted me to this photo was that the genders were separated. In other words, the men were on one side, some mingled as we can see, but the women were seated by themselves because no one wanted them to hear any bad words during a football game. I can attest at my house now when I'm watching the Bears. I am not allowed to be in the same room with other human beings and are forced to go to the attic where we still have a 12-inch black and white TV, which I have to watch the game on. And the rules were a little bit crazy, as you can see here. You only needed 5 yards for a first down, but there were only 3 downs 120 years ago. And a touchdown and a field goal were both worth the same, 5 points. One of the favorite plays was called the wedge. And what happened was all the people would loop their fingers inside the belt of the guy next to them, and they'd form a wedge, almost like sparrows flying south. And the smallest guy in the team would be behind the wedge. As they went downfield and they started encountering resistance, someone would take the smallest guy in the team and throw him over the top of the pile for extra yardage. Well, the defenses got smart. They soon formed their own wedge, and when they saw that wedge coming down the field, they had their own little guy. And sometimes the teams threw their smallest player up in the air at the same time and they collided. So the wedge was actually forbidden. Modern rules in 1905, thanks to President Roosevelt. As you can see from this photo from DePaul University playing around then. It looks like a WWE wrestling match. They got their arms cocked, they're kicking and everything else. But the field got smaller, 100 yards from 110. Now we had the 4 downs eventually came in. So it was quite a bit with those changes. But you've all heard maybe of George Halas. And pro football, as we go into that part of the segment, starts with Halas. And he was not really a good athlete. In fact, he didn't play much at Crane Tech in Chicago. He only played 1 year of football. He was an indoor baseball player. And what that was, we could play a game of indoor baseball in a room like this because we had a big 17-inch mush ball. The bats were broomsticks, and the bases were only 20 feet apart. But if you hit it off the wall, it would either be a home run or a triple or double or single if it got through. But the pitchers could throw the ball as hard as they wanted to. And this is the first photo of George Halas as an athlete I was able to find. He is down here as a freshman at Crane Tech High School. Really tiny, and on the right, that's him in a posed photo making a tag at one of the games. Halas then went to the University of Illinois. He was also part of the Great Lakes Naval Training Center football team in 1918, which won the Rose Bowl. We talked about Pasadena a moment ago in the Rose Bowl. That was the only Rose Bowl played which did not involve college team because of a Spanish flu as well as World War I wrapping up. Halas was the most valuable player. He came back and he signed with a team called the Hammond Pros in 1919. And that's where he met the great Jim Thorpe. And Thorpe tackled him so hard that Halas threatened to quit football forever. In fact, he told his mother, "I told Mom, football's over for me." But then in 1920, he got a call from a company in Decatur, Illinois. And the Staley company owned by A.E. Staley offered him a job to come down and run the football team and perhaps be an athletic director for all the sports they had for their employees, as well as to market the name of the company across the country with the teams that would travel. And then in 1920, Halas was there when the National Football League was formed in Canton, Ohio. And Jim Thorpe was the first president of the league. And Thorpe was a great football player, greatest athlete of the century probably, but not too good a businessman. So only lasted a year. But most of the teams way back then were from smaller towns, like Rock Island, Illinois had a team. Moline played a lot of the NFL teams as well at the time. So it became kind of an opportunity for the league to cut down on some of the smaller towns in order to grow, which is what they did. And then in 1921, the Bears, or Staleys, moved to Chicago finally, and they were called the Chicago Staleys for 1 year. And a funny story was they didn't have a whole lot of money, and when the first people started coming through the gate, Halas would hide behind the ticket counter, and when they got $10 in sales, he would take that $10 and run across the street to the drugstore to buy tape so we could tape his players. Now, of course, the team, according to Forbes magazine, is worth $6.3 billion. 1922, we have the Bears. Might have seen this on Saturday Night Live. Hallis named the team the Bears. He wanted to call them the Cubs, but football players were bigger, and so he named them the Bears. Now I have to tell you my favorite story of my research. In 1922, the Bears and the Cardinals played. Remember the Chicago Cardinals back on the south side of Chicago? The Bears were on the north side, and they didn't like each other. And so to set up our greatest fight ever, the great halfback, Patty Driscoll of the Cardinals, ran around right in, where he was met by Dutch Sterneman and George Hallis, who not only tackled him, but slammed him headfirst into the ground. You could do that in those days. Well, Driscoll was knocked out, got up woozy, started swinging. He knocked out Dutch Sterneman. Then the players in both teams started coming in and having a good time. Pretty soon all the fans poured out of the stands. They were on the field having a battle. And then the cops came. They were on horseback trying to break up this riot on the field. Ed Healy, who had just come over to the Bears from Rock Island, said, "Here I was just signed a week ago, and a group of men with guns out came out to protect Patty Driscoll. You had the Al Capone crowd." So here came that bunch of Southside rooters. And the game ended with the Cardinals winning 6-0. And years later, George Hallis recalled the game in his autobiography, and he wrote, "Sure, we lost the game 6-0, but everyone had a good time." Here's where we see where some of the players got paid at the time. They were paid by the game from the Dutch Sterneman collection. The highest paid was George Trafton at $90 a game. So they weren't making much money, and even through the 40s and 50s, a lot of the players had to take a second job because they couldn't afford it just on their football earnings. In 1925, the great Red Grange from the University of Illinois was signed by the Bears. Changed pro football forever. However, he was such a fast halfback and punt returner that teams were a little afraid of playing against him in the pros. His first game was against the Chicago Cardinals at Wrigley Field. For the first time, a game in the National Football League was sold out with 34,000 people there. Patty Driscoll, we mentioned a couple of times, was the punter. In other words, he kicked the ball away if they couldn't get their first down. And he punted 18 times that day. You imagine it was a boring game, it was 0-0. 17 of them were away from Red Grange. So it was kind of a dull, boring game, and 0-0. And after the game, Grange and Driscoll walked off the game, off the field, and as they passed each section, they would walk by and the fans would boo. They'd boo louder, and boo louder, and Driscoll shook his head. In fact, that night, he went home to his wife and he said, "I don't know why they were booing that poor Red Grange. That young lad could not do anything." And his wife said, "No, honey, they weren't booing Red, they were booing you, because Patty wouldn't give him a chance to run the ball." But this led to a barnstorming tour. The Bears played in front of 70,000 people in New York City to save the Giants franchise. Then they made a trip over to Washington for the Redskins. And at that time, they were invited to meet President Coolidge at the White House. And as they were waiting outside the Oval Office, it was Grange and Hallis. The secretary came in and said, "Gentlemen, come on in and meet President Coolidge." And they were introduced as such. Said, "Mr. President, I'd like to introduce you to Red Grange and George Hallis of the Chicago Bears." Well, the president evidently was not a football fan, because he said, "Welcome to the White House, gentlemen. I've always enjoyed animal acts." Then in the 20s, a young man from the University of Iowa, Duke Slater, you may have heard of him, the field's named after him in Iowa City, 8 times All-Pro. He paved the way for the Cardinals and Ernie Nevers to set a record that still stands today. Nevers scored 40 points in one game, the most ever scored by an individual in an NFL game. Of course, Hallis has been told that he didn't like referees. I'll give you one example. A referee called a penalty on the Bears, and Hallis said, "No, you stink, ref." Well, the ref had just marked off 10 yards. So he marked off another 10 yards, turned to Hallis and said, Hey, coach, how do I smell now? The course was hell is cheap. Here he is with Gale Sayers and Dick Butkus. Mike Ditka had that famous line that said, Hallis throws around nickels like they were manhole covers. One of the Chicago Cardinals told me that at home games, for example, when the Cardinals played at the Bears, the home team had to provide a lunch or a dinner after the game. And Hallis lost the game with the Cardinals, and so as all 32 members of the team piled into the locker room to get their post-game meal, they found out Hallis left 2 loaves of bread and 2 pounds of salami for all those guys. He was bad, and he was tight. We have the great Bronco Nagurski coming around in 1930. This shows what they made for the year. Nagurski made $5,000. He was the highest paid, but Hallis was so cheap that that's the most he ever made in his career. And this is really interesting. Starting the 1931 season, the Bears had a little over $250 in the bank, so grateful to Dutch Sturman for that. One of the best stories was football in Wrigley Field. Northwestern and Iowa played there a couple weeks ago. The field was arranged a little differently, but right past the end zone is a brick wall. And that's Dick Plasman. And he was the last guy in the league not to wear a helmet, got knocked out one game. But the best story is Bronco Nagurski, who we mentioned, a big burly 6 foot, 225-pound fullback for the Bears from Minnesota. One time they gave him the ball. His style of running was to keep his head down and just go right ahead. And he found out that from the 3-yard line that he was met by one guy. He knocked him aside. The second guy hit him at the goal line. He knocked him aside. Kept his head down, ran smack dab into the wall. Well, Bronco was knocked a little woozy. He came backwards. He didn't know where he was. Hallis ran up to him. He said, Bronco, are you okay? He said, sure, coach, I'm okay. Why? He said, well, you got hit pretty hard. He said, well, those first 2 guys were nothing. That third guy, he really packed a wallop. Our first night game in football took place in the early 30s inside Chicago Stadium. The fun part of this, which I go into more deeply in talks, is that the circus had been in town. That's why they were able to move inside. However, if you can imagine the elephants and the giraffes inside that for 2 weeks, they played on the same field. So it's politically correct if I don't mention it. Then we had the Bears in 1940. They lost a close game to Washington, 7-3. Afterwards, they felt that they were kind of rooked by the referees and complained. The owner of Washington called them a bunch of crybabies. So, ironically, the same 2 teams met for the championship. And Hallis, the master innovator, any business you want to encourage your employees, found every clipping about the game that owner said about his team being a bunch of crybabies. And the result was the Bears won 73-0. Still the biggest margin of victory in history and the most points ever scored in a game. In the 40s, the war was here. Cardinals and the Steelers combined to form a team that was so awful it's been called the worst team in NFL history. They lost all 10 games. They were nicknamed the Card Pits. The Chicago Tribune changed that to carpets that we walk on. Why not? Everybody walks all over them every game. So, one of my heroes, Mons Tonelli, he enlisted before World War II. He was captured by the Japanese, suffered the entire time of the war in prison camps, survived the Bataan Death March. Really a great man. He had a great story about the only thing that got him through was his Notre Dame ring. He went to Notre Dame. But prisoners were not allowed to have any kind of personal items. One day he came back to his little tent after his work detail and the ring was gone. It wasn't long later that a very well-dressed Japanese officer with a sword came by and asked if he was Tonelli. And he said, yeah. He knew it could be executed right there because if he did something wrong. Instead, the officer in perfect English said, is this your ring? And Tonelli said, yes, it is. And he gave it back to him. So in all this horrible stuff that was going on in the war, Tonelli discovered a little bit of humanity, got his ring back. He said, as he was so grateful not only for the ring but for his life, the officer started to walk away and said, hey, I know who you are, Tonelli. I went to the University of Southern California. I was at that game in '38 when your touchdown beat us. Tonelli said he tried to find him after the war, didn't really have any luck. So one of my favorite people, Montanelli. I wanted to conclude with one more story. Bulldog Turner was a great Hall of Fame center for the Chicago Bears. And Bulldog liked to drink beer. One day in 1942 or so, the Bears won a big game. And they had a bunch of beer on the second floor of their hotel. Bulldog, since it was warm out, had an open window that she was sitting on. And pretty soon he took a deep, deep tug on his beer, fell out the window, hit the awning over the first floor, and just collapsed in a pile. Well, pretty soon one of Chicago's finest cops came over. He had his nightstick here. He said, "Hey, buddy," looking at Bulldog, "Hey, buddy, what's going on here?" Bulldog, who had a couple of beers, says, "I don't know, I just got here myself." So thank you very much for your time today. Becky, thank you. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them, and I'll repeat them for everybody if you can't hear. Any questions you may have? Yes, sir.
Do you believe Steve McMichael will be in the Hall of Fame?
Yes, he apparently was got the final go-ahead now. He's got to go over one more hurdle, but that usually is unanimous. So sometimes in the past we've seen where, for example, the seniors, they previously nominated two and they both don't get in. But I think he will be, yes, and well-deserved.
You want to tell him what his disease is right now?
Yeah, Steve McMichael was the big tackle, defensive tackle for the Bears and their Super Bowl winning team. He developed MS, I believe, and he's now totally incapacitated. His mind is there. He's no longer 280 pounds, of course, so it's a sad story, but the loyalty of his wife and the loyalty of his teammates who keep coming over to see him and prop him up, and his one dream is to get considered for the Hall of Fame, and it looks like if he can hold on, this will be the year. So great question. Yes, was Steve McMichael possibly going to be in the Hall of Fame? Yes, sir.
Well, I grew up in St. Louis and saw a lot of Cardinal football games. What led to them leaving Chicago, and when did that happen?
Oh, sure. Yeah, the question is, why did the Cardinals leave Chicago for St. Louis? That happened in March of 1960. Basically, it was for television rights. That was the main story, because they had something called the blackout rule back then, which meant if your team was playing on the road, the games could not be televised if the other team in town was playing at home. So we had the Bears and Cardinals, the only city with two teams. So the real story was Hallis had a lot of strength in the league. He personally, or the Bears, gave the Cardinals $500,000, big dollars in 1960 to move to St. Louis. And the other part was the other owners were supporting that. The Cardinals were drawing so few people at Comiskey Park that they couldn't make their guarantee. They were supposed to say pay $10,000 to the visiting team to come, but they weren't drawing enough people. So officially it was for television, but I think it was Hallis now had unbridled access to the television rights in Chicago. Good question, thank you. Yes, in the back.
Was Duke Slater the first African-American to play in the NFL?
Yeah, was Duke Slater the first African-American to play in the NFL? There was another gentleman, I believe it was Fritz Pollard, played for the Hammond Pros in 1920. But certainly Duke was right behind there. He was the first African-American lineman to play in the NFL. As I mentioned, he had a great career with both Rock Island and the Chicago Cardinals. All-Pro 8 times. And I'll never understand why it took the Hall of Fame this long to put him in with those kind of credentials. Yes. And then you may have heard in the 30s, the NFL suddenly blocked all black players from playing in the league, which is horrible, horrible. I just can't believe that. And in my opinion, George Hallis and George Preston Marshall, the Redskins, were behind that. But they kept that until the mid-40s. Yes?
Follow up on that. Duke Slater came to Des Moines several times to visit Dr. William Ritchie, who was a dentist and who was an Iowa person. And I know nothing about sports now, then, or whatever. Duke Slater.
That was nice. One of our guests got to meet Duke Slater when he came to Des Moines in earlier days to meet with a doctor. Great comment.
Do you think we'll actually leave Soldier Field?
Whoa, the Bears leave Soldier Field. You know, I kind of hope so. I shouldn't say that because I'm a traditionalist, but I also avoid Soldier Field. The question was, will the Bears ever leave Soldier Field in Chicago? And I I thought for sure when they bought the land of Arlington Park in Chicago that they were gonna move, but now they seem like they're taking a step back. I don't know, are they gonna build condos there? I don't know. Soldier Field has poor parking. It's the oldest stadium in the NFL, built in 1924. But
That's all part of it. It's the
I guess my
dollar, you gotta work to get there.
yes, you do. So it seems like the path is clear that they can move to Arlington Heights, become the Arlington Heights Bears. But I don't know. It'll take a few years. It seems to be moving too slow. I always look back at the Cardinals, who couldn't get a stadium built in Chicago nor St. Louis, and then when they first moved to Arizona, they used Arizona State Stadium, which is great until you realize that the sun, the Arizona sun, beats on the east side bleachers for the entire game, and no one was coming to the games. And they finally got their own stadium. So there's hope for the Bears. Yes?
Maybe reminisce a little bit about what you think was the greatest teams, some of those players.
Some of the question is some of the greatest games
The great teams and the great players.
and the great players. One of my favorites, even though I wasn't there, Sean might have been there, was in 1920 when the Bears and the Cardinals first played. And it was in a tiny field called Normal Park. And the fans circled like you would a kid's game at the Park District. And late in the game, the Bears led 6-0. The Cardinals halfback ran over near the sidelines, and all the players kind of engulfed him, so the Bears defenders couldn't tackle him, and the fans escorted him into the end zone. And the Cardinals kicked the point to win 7-6. But some of the great players throughout the years of Chicago and elsewhere, Patty Driscoll, 5'7", who could drop kick field goals 55 yards. Once got knocked out in an indoor game at what is now or was the Chicago Amphitheater. Came out and kicked this field goal, and afterwards had no recollection of it. So that was kind of a neat thing. But Duke Slater, of course, was I think the greatest lineman in the early NFL history. And if you go to quarterback, Sid Luckman of the Bears set records that are still standing in the Bears record book. So there's quite a few good ones. I'm trying to think what my greatest game in the NFL. I still remember Joe Namath in 1969. Sean was babysitting me. I was only 2 years old. I appreciate it.
I'm still waiting for the payment.
So that was a game I'll always remember. And of course, the Bears finally winning the Super Bowl in 1985. Yes, sir.
Yeah, of course we know that University of Georgia has great football today, and they didn't always make that many contributions to the NFL, but as a kid I remember a great from Georgia, I believe, that played in the Chicago Cardinals, Charlie Trippy.
Yes.
And I think those were toward the latter years of the Cardinals. I just wondered if you could address a little bit some of what he contributed to.
Yeah, boy, the question is Charlie Trippy of the Chicago Cardinals and the University of Georgia had a really unique career because he was an All-American, then went into the war and came back and became an All-American again. He played in, I think, 5 college all-star games, which were played every summer. Usually he played once when he graduated. But Trippy became an All-Pro. He's now in the Hall of Fame because he could do so much stuff. I had a chance to meet him when I was preparing one of my books. What a gentleman. But the fun story about him is the recruitment of Charlie Trippy. He was a #1 draft choice while he was in the service, so he could go back in the pool and be drafted again. But a new league came out in 1946-47, and they wanted Charlie Trippy to play for the New York Yankees football team and the New York Yankees baseball team. And Charles Bidwell, of the Cardinals owner, he tracked Charlie Trippy down and traveled with him and secured him to the biggest contract ever in the NFL, $100,000 over 2 years. And so that really, really opened people's eyes up. Man, this football must be good if they can spend that kind of money. But Charlie Trippy, one of the all-time greats, he stayed with the team through, I think, about 1954 or 55, then became an assistant coach, and he spent some time at Georgia as well. Great question.
One more?
One more. Yes, sir.
We hear so much now about how much the game impacts the players' bodies.
Yeah.
physically. So I'm just curious, historically, was it always as bad as it is now?
Yeah. The question is about the impact of the football on your bodies, and it was a little different then. Montanelli, who I talked about, who came back to play in the NFL for 1 game, he told me the reason they didn't get hurt as badly is because they tackled with their hips and their feet. In other words, they kind of tripped the ball carrier with it. they had no protection, as you can see this helmet, there's no face mask anymore, and there wasn't much in terms of protection for the head. But that was a big improvement over from 1905, when people were actually dying in games, not from their injuries, but maybe from infections, because the fields might have glass or nails on it, and there was nothing, no antibiotics to save them. But great question. I think the game was played different. The athletes were smaller, not quite as fast, and the game was not quite as brutal. Good question. Thank you.
Oh,
Becky, thank
fantastic.
you.
Wow. I'll never drive by Soldier Field again and look at it the same way. Okay, I want to thank you so much, Joe, for the informative presentation and for spending time with us here in Des Moines. And as a token of our appreciation, we've donated a book in your honor to the Des Moines Public Library. Your book will become part of the Rotary Rosie Reader Band collection. And our club donated $40,000 to the Des Moines Public Library Foundation in 2020 to purchase that band. So thank you. You'll be traveling around Des Moines. And now for our upcoming meetings. Our upcoming speaker slide is up. And remember that you can bring guests, and if you and the guests want to register, you do need to RSVP by 9 a.m. the Wednesday before the meeting. And you cannot register your own guests. You do need to go through Kitty to do that. But next week, no meeting. Happy Thanksgiving on the 23rd. November 30th, Amanda Wanke with DART will be here talking to us about our public transportation. And December 7th is our annual meeting. And we will be announcing the new 24-25 Board of Directors. It's very important that you vote on this. We need a quorum. And so a Survey Monkey vote will be emailed out to you this Monday. And your vote is due then by the 4th of December. And then on our December 7th meeting, the results will be announced. And we'll also get to meet our $40,000 community grant recipient for this year. So we'll find out who is the lucky recipient on December 7th. And again, I want to thank you all for being with us. You're such a vital part of the Rotary Club of Des Moines, where club number 27 means business. Yeah. And until we meet again, let's get out there and have fun and do good in the name of Rotary. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you on November 30th. We're adjourned.